Ngalakin Khadijan Nyunga Boja.
Software control. And one of the reasons that drove this is because of the level of collaboration you're seeing now in the software development environment. I mean, Ubuntu, for example, developed by blooming everyone. And there's all these collaboration forums now, which has only really probably appeared widely in the last 10 years. So Git came as a response to that, about how do we handle all these different versions of stuff flying all over the place. So yeah. Cool, all right, I think I'll hand you back.
All right. I'd like everyone to thank Stephen. So you're welcome to hang around for our next session. We've got an information session basically discussing the project, and Craig Williams is joining from IT to give people a bit of information. So
Probably have to disappear.
Okay. Thanks, mate.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Good on you.
Recording stopped.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, really? Okay. I'll keep that going. Oh, you,
Let's take it down.
yeah, you can just put it up.
I'll get upset. Thanks for the invite, mate.
Thanks for coming.
It's great. Absolute pleasure.
Really good.
Yeah, I didn't realise that Sally was actually going for them. Thanks for the water too.
You met Adrian?
Hey, you've been before. I think we met somewhere. Thanks a lot.
I'm going to try to be more diligent. Firstly, I'm creating excuses. I'm doing all that.
Sorry?
Broadway, you can get 2 hours.
Yeah, usually they produce one of those. I come up with, every time I start a project, I come up with a list of things. I come up with a list of things every time I start a project. I can't.
We're at 2.6 for.
Yeah, I know.
I'm at now 2.10 here. And Ali's now got at least 2.9. Yeah, I think so.
Because I was right this week and really
finish that, I'll ask IT for the math back again for another 3 weeks and just but
Yeah, it's not urgent. It's just saying for the future. That's probably things that you should consider.
if we can roll out a new version for, I didn't check this week for the upload. I don't know if everyone's got it or not.
I'll check today. I'll check this out. You don't need to check. I'll check every day.
Community of practice on team guys up.
Couple more minutes, people. Sorry, Zoom's taking its time. All right, folks online, can you hear me? Can somebody respond, please? All right, welcome to the information session. Today we do have Craig online, and I'm hoping that we can hear his audio as well. Craig, do you want to give it a go?
Hopefully you can all hear me.
Yep, I'll just turn the volume down a little bit. Just give me a second.
No worries.
All right, can you try again?
Sure.
Okay, that sounds good.
Recording in progress.
All right, hope you don't mind. So you can share your screen now.
All good.
Okay. When you're ready, Craig, we're all good to go.
So are you waiting on me to legit?
Yeah, we're waiting on your share screen.
You're waiting to share the screen, yes.
Yep.
Sorry, this is not quite clear on the audio, so
Okay, sorry.
that's okay. Just grab the presentation that I shared with you earlier.
Yep.
statement, and there's no need
Yes.
to.
No, you don't need to.
Okay. So I assume that's visible?
That's visible.
Okay. So my understanding is that there are some questions or some requirements to understand the ability to verify an individual based on the presentation of their campus card in order to complete this project. And at the university, there are fundamentally two ways to do that. Both of them are using REST calls to two separate systems. One of those is the campus card system, the product that, or rather the door control system, the product that provides that functionality is called Gallagher, and it has a component called the Command Center, which I realize sounds very melodramatic. And it offers an API called the Third Party Integrations API that has a number of methods in it that allow you to provide details such as the MyFairCard serial number and retrieve from that information about the holder of that card. The other way to do that is by direct query to the Unicard API. So that's the system that actually mints and maintains the data about the cards. That's the system of record for the relationship between a person's ID, so that's your staff and student number, and the physical card that you have been issued. There are some differences. Gallagher is a security product, so it does this kind of control, and so it has an understanding of the business logic, so the authorizations an individual might have, what you have access to, what times you might have access to it, and so on. Whereas the Unicard API only provides a direct one-to-one relationship between your MyFairCard serial number, so that's the card number on the actual physical token, and the person ID of the person who's issued that card. So hopefully that should be simple enough. As I said, they're both REST APIs, so they can both be called very easily. They have similar authentication requirements in that you need to have an account that has permission to call that API, that you then get a token that allows you to call that API, and so on and so forth. And they require different information sets in order to achieve the outcome you're looking for. On top of that, any system at the university is required to comply with a number of what we generally call architectural requirements. A subset of those are security requirements, and I've picked out a number here which will be of relevance to the particular problem statement as I understand it. And so I thought I could go through these, or I have some detail on them, but what these come down to is in the design, these topics will need to be considered and an appropriate response provided to each of them. If this was to be deployed at the university in production, each of these items will need to have an appropriate design response that is verifiable within the solution. Which is to say that you need to both say that it does something about each of these things, and then we need to be able to prove it can do the thing that you've said it can do. So that's a brief one. I don't know if it'll be easier to handle this in questions and answers, or I can go into detail on any of these topics. Felicia?
Yeah, could you give everyone a bit of an idea of, do you have any bit more information since last time we spoke regarding the cost structure, etc., of access to the APIs?
So at this point in time, the university has access to both of these within its existing license subscriptions. So the university would have access to them within its existing products. So there would be a fee involved in a production integration with Gallagher by a third party.
And the Unicard, that's essentially...
Unicard is free.
Yep.
So Unicard is just an API that comes as part of the system by default. And I don't know what the fee structure is for the third party. I forget the name of the program they have, is a third party verification thing. Obviously, they would not disclose that information.
Okay. Do you want to go over a few of the key requirements that you would see from slide number 3?
Yeah, so I think the key components here, and these are somewhat generic in that we would look for these in almost every system, are around the security of the messaging. So this is the electronic messaging requirement. All messages pass between systems that contain privileged information. So in this case, it's important to understand that the card serial number and the information about the person who holds the card are both considered privileged. Must be encrypted appropriately. I can provide a definition of what appropriate means in this case, if you give me 2 seconds. Similarly, you'll see that there's information here around access to network ports, protocols, and services. They both be appropriate in their controls, which is to say, for example, the device must be capable of authenticating to the network to prove that it is the device that it claims to be, using an X509 certificate or some kind of key. And the device itself must be secure. It cannot as simple as simply plugging in any device and having it communicate with trusted information sources on the network. It must both authenticate to the network in a secure fashion, and in and of itself, there must be evidence that it is secure. So that is that it's patched and hardened and capable of continuing to be patched. It cannot be simply deployed and then forgotten about. It must have some kind of logs that can be forwarded onto a system for analysis. It must manage its own credentials, so the credentials required to authenticate to the device itself in order to set it up or do administration or maintenance and troubleshooting must be managed in a particular way. There must be a record of who has access to the device and also what the device has granted access to. What else do we have that's probably relevant? The architecture of the overall system must abide by a zoned approach to its security, which is to say that it needs to separate components of different trust levels into different logical zones and establish appropriate controls for the communication between them. So in a system, I'm not sure if this topic has been covered, but you would have different components which inherently deal with information of different kind of criticality or confidentiality, and you would want to separate those components and establish in the communication between them a set of controls that appropriately protects the information that passes between them.
So Craig, is that an access level control?
Well, so we don't define in our requirements exactly how that is to be done, because it can be different from solution to solution. But a good example might be where if you have a user-facing component to the solution, and you have a database, say, of information about the entitlements an individual user should have, because the information being handled, their presentation versus information is different, they should be logically separated in some fashion. Now, in a kind of a traditional web application, this is where things like the 3-tier topology come from, where presentation is kept separate from logic and kept separate from data, so that if there was a compromise to occur in the presentation layer, say the UI, that would not necessarily mean that that would grant access to deeper layers of the application. in this case where you've got a physical device, that physical device should be logically separated from the anything that controls either stores data or processes information. The business logic layer should be different, and there should be controls between those two components that enable the designer of that system to appropriately secure or appropriately show that the information flow between those two components is appropriately secured and that there's no leakage of information from one system to the next. Hopefully that makes sense? Yep, that's fine. I'm happy to go over it with some practical examples if required. I've got some more definition of these if that is of interest. I will need to. I do. I took the time just to specify or provide some definitions for each of these terms, which should be useful, which I'll just open. And you have to wait for Excel here. So here we go. So if I share, this, I realize that's quite small probably. Sorry, yeah, but if we were to look at, for example, the cryptographic controls requirement, so that's probably the one that might be the most immediately technically relevant. Here you can say this refers to what kinds of encryption are acceptable, and it also refers to a higher level document, which is NIST SB 800. I'm not sure if people are familiar with NIST or the, which is the National Institutes of Science and Technology in the US. They publish a number of reference standards for things like information security and system design, and we use those heavily. And this gives you, for example, a list of the kinds of encryption methods that would be acceptable for a system that was to be deployed at the university. So that's it. I can provide in detail, but there's also controls here which are perhaps not technical, rather they're design or process controls. So an example to that would be the requirement around documentation. So there needs to be documentation around the operational elements of any system, which is, how does it installed, configuration and backed up, how are errors handled within that system, and what do you do in the case of particular errors, and how the system should be restarted and recovered in the event of failure. Similarly, there are requirements around registration processes. So if your system will, in this case, be managing university information, the information being the relationship of an individual to an entitlement, so the system or machine that they're allowed to use, and there needs to be a record of who granted them that access and when and why. And that needs to be maintained in an appropriate fashion. And some guidance on that is given here. So it refers to line managers and information system owners. And that the authorization and granting of access must be completed by separate individuals. So that's an important step where you cannot both say that someone has access to something and give it to them. That must be a separated process. So this is available. I can pass that on, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. There's more information underlying this. This is a quick summary that I put together. There's guidance on how passwords should be created, what characteristics they should comply to, for both regular users and privileged users, which is an important separation to maintain, how logs should be managed, and so on and so forth. So I think I provided this to you, Delucio, if you want to pass it to the class, and I'm happy to answer questions on it. Yeah, so this is cribbed out of our, just for context, our every system at the university is subjected to review of these, but there's 500 of those controls in that review pack. So this is a subset of what something like this would be subject to in a real world environment, if you like. Sure. You can. Hang on, let me just pull that up so I know what I'm referring to. Yep. Unicard. So either of those are viable sources of data information in this case, yep. So if this was to, yes, in a production integration, part of your solution should be the obtaining and managing of those. Now, they would be granted upon a certain amount of time, and that amount of time would be based on a review of the confidentiality of the information that's being accessed. But in this case, it might be something like several months, and then that would expire, and your code would have to reobtain a token, and your application would be granted an identity for the purposes of doing that. That's right. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a username and password, but it would have an identity. So it would have a way of authenticating itself as that machine. It might also be a certificate or a key. Yeah, so we have the technology to manage most of those scenarios. I don't know if that's, if we wanted to go into super detail for the purposes of this one, but yeah, it's totally possible to do that. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely, I would expect that the solution would be capable of managing its whatever credential it's given in order to both prove who it is, because that will rotate, and then it will then get tokens for its API calls to authenticate itself, which have a limited lifespan. Both of those things will change over the life of the product.
All right.
Questions? Come on.
That's been great. I think I'll open the floor for questions. There is one online on the chat. I'll read it out here.
I'm not very used to this format, sorry, so fine.
Yeah, I'll read out the question. Our team is looking at Wi-Fi tracking options for the location tracking requirements of the design, including RSSI and fingerprinting. Does UniIT have a log or database of the Unify access points at the university, including MAC addresses and physical locations of the APs in rooms? And I'll then also add to that, are you willing to hand that database out?
Yes. So the answer is yes, we do, and no, we're not.
Okay.
So the university, and I'll clarify that because it does sound a bit harsh. The university has made the decision that it doesn't want to go down the path of using automated location services for various reasons. But we do have a location of every Unify access point that's accurate to the centimeter, and it does have the ability to do location services. But so I don't think it's a bad idea to follow that path, but I will just say that we would not provide that information.
No, so could I ask a second part of the question? So yes, you would not supply that information. Let's say you entered into a relationship with a company in order to provide this product,
At that point, would you provide that information?
So if there would be a possibility of that information being provided, I am hesitant to answer that because that would involve conversation with lawyers
Yeah.
and people like that, and that's a bit outside my
Yeah, no, that's...
area, but the possibility definitely exists.
Yeah, okay, so thank you.
Can I then add, is it within our rights as employees or students of the university to build our own database, basically using, say, a little app on a phone, talking to a computer, basically saying, okay, I know where my GPS locations are. Can I essentially use the Wi-Fi MAC addresses, which are essentially broadcast, right, to identify a physical location based on that? We're only looking for regions. We're not looking for centimetre
I certainly
scale.
can't, but obviously technically you could do that.
Yes.
What I will tell you is that there are 2 acts in Western Australia which govern the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yes.
Which are the Privacy Act and the Telecommunications Interception Act, which inexplicably has a section on the use of devices to track people's location. And so if you intended to go down that path, review of those, and in full disclosure, well, basically that's where UniIT got with the use of this for, we intended to use it for things like, building occupancy, how many people are in a given building, but it's unclear under those acts exactly what rights the university has to do that.
Okay.
So I think in general, however, as long as you have informed consent from all of the users, I think you would be okay.
Fundamentally, you're not tracking users.
We're not tracking users, right? We're just, if we have an app that we install on my phone, for example, and I walk around and essentially validate GPS location with Unify access point, I'm not violating anyone's privacy, right?
I would think not, as long as you're not inadvertently tracking your own location.
Yep.
And then you would have to consent to it yourself, which
Yes.
seems self-evident, but
Okay.
Remembering that the ultimate goal is to track the location of a piece of equipment, right? Not an individual.
yeah. So we can't provide that because we can't differentiate between. So if your piece of equipment has a 802.11 beacon on it that you're using to track. If we turn on location services inside the wireless infrastructure, it doesn't differentiate between different kinds of beacons. Obviously, it tracks all beacons and thus will track people. But if you're doing it kind of the opposite way, that would be fine, I would think. Hopefully that was clear.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more questions online. What kind of card reader or module in the market can be used to read the Unicard?
The Unicard is a
Doesn't work on
MyFair
my
4K card, so anything like that.
Okay, anything will do a 4K card.
Yep.
Mine doesn't work.
Well, the only thing I'd say is it's important to look at the way that reader operates. They are not consistent in the market, especially when they're cheap.
Okay. Next question. Hi Greg, you mentioned the document with 500 controls. Are you able to provide the name of this document and do students have access to it? Background, if we are to satisfy these requirements, students may need to refer to these documents as a source.
So the full control document would be confidential because that would give away some of the stuff that people are looking for, but it's definitely, I can share parts of it, and it's referred to as the Cyber Control Catalog.
It's called what control catalog?
The Cyber Security Control Catalog.
Okay, right, cool. I think people are writing that down. Good.
Question. I'll repeat it. What can you?
Yeah, you can walk around with
Give
this.
us a moment, Craig. We're just gonna move the microphone around. All right.
Yes.
So if you had to create an application which interfaces with FEMI logins, would that be possible if we were going to create a solution with that? And if so, what considerations would you have?
Did you hear that?
I did not, sorry.
Oh, okay. Hang on, let me... Testing. This should be... Should try again.
Yep. So if you...
Can you hear us now?
I can.
Yep. So if you had to create an application which interfaces with the FEMI logins, would that be possible, if something that we can consider?
So is the question I understood it was, can you use UWA credentials to authenticate a user?
Yep. So yeah, exactly. So for example, if we had a piece of equipment, could we maybe log in through FEMI to make sure that that's that user, and could we be using that?
So the question is about logging in using UWA credentials through FEMI, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yep. So the short answer is yes. There is the preferred way to do that would be to use our public SAML interface, which is published using Azure AD. So that uses SAML 2.0 or OAuth 2.0. Both of those are fine. And if you want to use it, then I think maybe I think giving access to the test version of that would probably be okay. Certainly students have used it before. So if Dinesh wants to forward those details through to me, I can certainly arrange that.
So just to clarify, we can build an application that uses integrates that FEMI login.
You can build one. You cannot run it permanently, but certainly for the purposes of the project, I can give you the standard against which you should build that. Yes.
I've got one.
And test to use it with.
Yep. So in terms of, for example, local storage of those FEMI logins, would the security concerns be similar to the ones that you put on the slide 3 of your presentation, or would they have something different? So for example, if we lose local network connection on, let's say, our device or interlock, and we store it locally, would the same security concerns and requirements be similar to that Excel as well as that slide 3 of your presentation?
Not catch all of that, but it sounded like something to do with the local storage on the device.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, in the event...
And how the security requirements apply to that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, again, the first thing to do is to understand what information you're storing on the device itself. But there's no differentiation in terms of once you identify the kind of information you're storing. So let's say on the device you're going to be storing a cache of people or something, right? If you're storing information that's in any way personal or privileged, so information about a person or something that you're entitled to, must be protected. And that protection is here in it will be in, if I pull that requirement out, potentially I did not. But I would suggest to you that we would require that information is encrypted in the storage on the device.
Would you recommend any hardware to encrypt it, or is there any systems that UWA currently uses that can be integrated?
So is that about recommending a particular piece of hardware?
Yeah, yep. Or something that you currently use?
So from our requirements, it's less about the particular solution, because there are lots of those, and more about the ability of that solution to meet kind of a set of the abstract requirements. And they really are about the information you stored. I can't quite hear the detail of the question, sorry, so that's why I'm being a bit vague, so maybe if you can go in the chat. But I think the answer is I wouldn't suggest that there's a need to use any particular device or technology so much as there's a need to ensure that the solution is compliant with the need to encrypt the data at rest. And whether that's done in hardware
Yep. No. Okay.
Maybe I missed some of the nuance of the question.
No, I think you've addressed the question, and I think if I reinterpret it, if you were to store the user ID and the fact that they had access to this equipment, which would say they've completed safety training, for example, the combination, I think, of the user ID and that they've completed some kind of safety training would probably be considered privileged information and therefore need to be protected. Is that a fair comment, Craig?
That's correct, yes. And
Even if the user ID doesn't identify a specific name?
so, because the user ID can be very easily turned into a name through any number of public services, or by public I mean exposed to the university access layer, it's generally still considered not in the language we use, it's not privileged, but it's protected, which means we don't want to make it trivial to do that, because I can easily take someone's staff or student ID and get their name and where they work and what course they're enrolled in and enough information to kind of work out who they are by looking them up in any number of systems. I mean, just sending them an email or a message in Teams will give you most of that information.
All right.
So,
A few more questions. I don't know if this one is relevant at all, but I'll just put it out there anyway. It's a question, what is the type of database used by UWA?
so Udemy uses lots of kinds of databases. If the question is there a preferred database platform for this project? Kind of in order, the university is generally prefers and standardizes on either the Microsoft SQL or Azure database platform. And for the life of me, I can't remember what the brand name of the Azure managed database service is right now, but I think it's something like Azure SQL. Oracle, and then in terms of open source, Postgres.
Okay.
Or Redis or something like that.
All right. Next question, is student ID and student name privileged information? And I think you already answered that, yes.
Yeah, it's protected information, so we would not want to easily associate those two, although it is not, it is available to members of the university community directly.
Okay. And the last question here, does the university have a standard period of time to retain log usage data?
Could you repeat that, please, Felicia?
Does the university have a standard period of time to retain log/usage data?
Right, yes, I understand. Yes, and I can dig that up, but kind of you would want to go for at least a 30-day retention period.
Okay.
What I will say is that the university does run a central log management system, so that might be a consideration in how you achieve that goal.
So what you're saying is we would be required to log to this log management system?
I'm saying that it definitely would be an option to outsource the management of that requirement, yes.
Okay.
By shipping your logs to a central system.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, Craig, we're walking again.
It's okay. I apologise for the remoteness. If you come up today.
So what kind of MyFair protocol is using Campus Card, and is there any cryptology involved?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I mean, like, I googled MyFair 4K card, and there are two protocols. One is MyFair Classic, and the other one is MyFair Deathfire. So which one does the Campus Card use?
Sorry, I'm having trouble making that out. Can someone...
Yeah, so Craig, this student has looked up MyFair cards the 4K, and he says there are two versions available. There's a classic and a, what's the other one?
Oh, I see what the question is.
Yeah.
It's like classic and extended or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
MyFair. Their current card stock is MyFair Classic.
Okay. Okay. And what was the other part of the question?
Is there any cryptology involved?
Is there any encryption involved?
So in the solution that I have suggested, you're retrieving the card serial number, which does not involve any encrypted data on the card.
Okay. All right. Anyone else want me to walk? Sorry.
What standards for data encryption do the UWA smart cards incorporate?
For the card themselves, I don't recall off the top of my head, but I think in this case, because we're just talking about the card serial number, that is not stored encrypted on a MyFair Classic card, if I remember correctly.
Is that all you're talking about? Serial number? Is that all you are talking about in terms of the card serial number, or are you talking about any other information?
Just all data stored on the card, essentially. I just saw that there was some standards online, like 7816, that dealt with data encryption for all smart cards.
So, Craig, is there any other information on the smart card apart from the serial number?
So there are other data stores on the smart card, yeah, but those are not used for access control.
Okay, and it wouldn't be relevant to this project anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there are other data stores in MyFair on the card that in other parts of the memory on the device, but A, they're not used for access control, and B, I don't think we would give access to those.
Yep. Sounds sensible enough. Right. Anybody else? Going. Gone. Oh, again. Sorry.
Yeah, so I've seen with the Gallagher technology that it essentially connects to an I/O device and then to a controller which goes to the database. I was just wondering, do we have any information on those devices, like the controller and the I/O modules at UWA?
Did you get that, Craig?
Do we have information on the locations of the controller modules or the I/O HBus devices for the Gallagher systems?
So where the controller, I see. Okay. Yes. I suppose for the purposes of this, you can assume that there is one on each floor of each building.
Okay.
Or one for each floor of each building. I'm somewhat reluctant to provide that information.
That's fine.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah.
I think someone asked a question previously regarding your theme username and password access in sort of I think they said an application in format or something, and you refer to some sort of public standard API that you can provide.
Right. So UWA has a SAML2 and OAuth2 what's called an IDP, an institutional data provider, provided through Azure Active Directory, which is the preferred method of integration when it comes to authentication. So, yep. So that's a publicly documented thing. You can Google it and you'll get all the information you need on how to integrate with it.
Is it called SAML or SAML?
So the standard is SAML, SAML.
Yep.
Yep. And the platform we use, or the technology which provides a SAML compliant endpoint, is called Azure you'll sign into, your student email or whatever.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
All right, I think we're pretty much at time. Unless there's anyone who has any other pressing questions. Yes, we have one.
Hi, Craig. So I just asked that question earlier about the log and usage data retention. Is there any other information you can provide us about the outsourcing of it?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
So I asked the question about the log and usage data and how long we should hold it for. Is there any other information you can provide us about outsourcing that, the central log management system you were talking about?
I was just sorry, do I understand the question? This is about, is it about the logs or about something else?
The students asking about outsourcing the logging requirements to the central logging system.
Right, yes. So there are tons of different ways to do this. You can look at some solutions are things like syslog, but there are ways you can architect the solution that would enable collection. So there's kind of two ways to do this. One is where the product actively moves its logs itself out to a third party. So it will ship those off, and that's usually done through a protocol like syslog. There's a couple of Windows equivalents. There's Event Manager and Event Grid. And kind of the other way of doing that is that you would enable a logging application to collect logs from your solution. So many logging platforms are often called things like incident and event management platforms. Will have the ability to reach into a product and extract logs. If you go back to my point about documentation around the operation of the system, that's kind of where those two requirements come together. So if you think about it, whatever your solution is, it needs to be clearly documented because the person who is implementing the solution needs to understand how that requirement will be met. Hopefully that made sense. I don't want to kind of tell you exactly how I think it should be done.
Yep. All right. Students.